relax the staticky intro, okay? This is a shit pasta, ladies and gentlemen. Let's lower our standards. That being said, let's dive right in to see what this shit pasta contains. Not gonna hold you here for too long. Let's go. Last week I finished playing an SNES title called Conplus. It had been frustrating me since childhood, and it was an unusual game for several reasons. First, with a copyright date of 1998, it was one of the last games released for the console. Most notably, there was a little glass bubble on the front of the cartridge that made it stand out from the other games in my collection. And last, and most importantly, the game had no online presence, no fan sites, no ROMs, not even a mention. The company that made it, Infinite Cycle Limited, was a complete non-entity too. Left with no other options, my only hope was to find out anything about it, as to what it was, and the game that described it. I mean, all it said is complete 6 challenges. See, Conplus was sort of a variety pack, a dozen small games on a single card, similar to Action 52, except competently programmed. Each game had a challenge to complete, generally something like reaching the end, getting a certain score, or surviving for a certain length of time. It varied by game, and you were never told what the challenge was until you had beaten it. Here are the 6 I was able to do. Dino Run was one of the games. In this game you control a young dinosaur and guide it through a maze in an isometric view. Food is scattered across the maze, and you complete a level by eating all of it before hitting a time limit. To get through the maze you have to, well, navigate through obstacles and hazards such as hostile creatures, pits, jets of flames, one-way doors, and deep water. The graphical style is very cute, reminiscent of Bubble Bobble or the Kirby series. Dino Run has a 2-player mode where you try to eat more food than the other player. Me and my friends killed a lot of time on this one when we were young, charging madly through and trying to bait each other into traps. The challenge for this game was to complete 100 levels. There's no save option, and the later mazes were extremely unforgiving. But you could restart from your current level no matter how many times you died. Even setting aside a lot of time in the evening to play it, I had to leave the game running and paused for several nights before I got to the end. The next game was Alchemy Lab. Alchemy Lab was in the veins of Tetris or Dr. Mario. Gears with 3 teeth fall from the top of the screen, and each tooth has a colored gem. Once a gear lands, it can be rotated, and you clear gears from the screen by having 3 gems of the same color touch each other to score points. You lose if the gears overflow the top of the screen. The game also supports competitive multiplayer, in which you and another player can interfere with one another by scoring large combos to send useless and difficult to remove rusty gears down to each other's playfield. The challenge on this one was to complete the story mode, which pitted you, by the way, against a series of 8 AI opponents. On the hardest difficulty, I loved this game as a kid, and its challenge was the only one I'd completed when I was younger. The next game was East and West. It was a old turn-based war game based on the Cold War circa 1970. The player could choose to play either NATO or the Warsaw Pact in a fight for control of the entire world. No nuclear weapons were allowed or even mentioned, but aside from that, it's fairly realistic. With the player needing to keep units supplied with food, fuel, and ammunition, bad weather hampering operations, radar and scouts needed to spot the enemy, etc. Like the last 2 games, it had a 2-player mode as well, but the whole thing is so heavily balanced in the Pact's favor that you honestly can't have a fair match. Maybe Infinite Cycle was staffed by just bitter Russians, in all honesty. And after losing as the NATO over and over again, I eventually gave in and won as the Pact, which still counted. It kind of defeats the point of being a challenge if you can just cheese your way through it, doesn't it? That said, it still took me a ridiculously long time to complete, 200 turns or so. In fact, most of which was spent throwing waves of troops across the Bering Strait. Luckily, though, the game had a save function. Now, the next game I got was Stalker. Now, this was a 2D side-scrolling horror adventure game. Your character was a man clad in a fedora and trench coat, trapped in a desolate building and pursued by a thematically fitting humanoid figure. For example, the first level is in a medieval castle, and your attacker is an animated suit of armor. The second is a workshop with a knife-wielding wooden dummy. In each level, your goal is to find a way to destroy the stalker. In the meantime, you have to plan your movements to avoid it, and run or hide if it finds you. Based on the man's attire and the style of the cars in the abandoned factory level, I'd say the game takes place in the early 20th century. I didn't play this one as a kid because honestly it scared me and I just couldn't figure out how to progress. I completed the challenges for this one by finishing all 4 levels. Some of the puzzles were pretty obtuse. I have yet to figure out how In Memoriam Awaken the Seer translates to set the pocket watch to 8 o'clock and put it in the fruit bowl, and I had to brute force a fair amount of them, just using every item in my inventory or at least on something that could be interacted with until I found something that worked. I was glad to be done with this one, to say the least. The next game in the list was Into the Silent Forest. This one put me into a role of a young boy, dumping me into a cabin in the edge of the forest without an introduction or title screen. You wander around the map in a top-down view, making your way through a winding, twisting maze of trees, and that's it. The game never gives you any hint of who your character is supposed to be or what they're trying to accomplish, and I didn't notice any enemies or hazards the entire time I played. The only possible threat I might have seen, and I can't swear to this, is an occasional glimpse of emaciated skull-faced creatures standing hunched over in one of the trees. Graphically, it's just as weird. The sprites look like something you'd see on the NES, and the ground is a solid black. There's no music either. It makes me think that it was some alpha build and that, for some reason, made it into the cartridge alongside a bunch of finished games. My initial assumption was that I had to make it out of the forest, and that was after hours of walking everywhere, bumping into anything that looked remotely interesting and pressing every button in the hopes that something would happen, occasionally setting the controller down to sketch out a map in my notebook. There were several locations that looked like they should have been important, but were not. Among these were a wide ring of stakes surrounding a small pile of burnt wood, an abandoned tent containing a rifle and axe, and a gravestone on top of a steep rocky hill. While none of these had any apparent in-game purpose, they were at least useful as landmarks. I finally completed the challenge for this one by finding a well and jumping into it. I don't know why that worked, but it did, and kind of sums up why I gave on this game pretty quickly as a kid. The next game that I played was Dark Waters. Now, Dark Waters was the last game I had ever completed, and it was the one that scared me badly enough as a kid that I'd only played once. This one opens with a cutscene showing an overhead view of a motorboat moving into the middle of a small, vibrant blue lake on top of a tall mountain. Then it switches to a close-up view of the boat, which has one man at the engine and another man in a scuba gear sitting in the edge. The man at the engine gives the diver a thumbs up, and the diver drops off the side with a splash. The game itself is simple. You're deep within a lake, so deep that all you can see aside from your character is darkness. You view the diver from behind as he swims forward, and you can move him left, down, up, and right as he goes. Now, for about a minute, nothing happens. All there really is to do is listen to music, an uneven drum beat with a pitch almost too low to hear. And that's when you see the shadow in the distance, which very quickly grows into a roaring mouth full of sharp razor teeth that takes up about half the screen. And that's Dark Waters. You sit there, wait for one of those creatures to show up, and as soon as you can see which part of the screen is coming from, try to pull off a split-second dodge. If any of them touch you, you're dead. Even after the first, they still come in frequently, but gradually the time between attacks drop until you're constantly dodging them. Worst, you can't pause the game, which incidentally means you can't go back to the main menu. You either sit there and do it perfectly for however long it takes, or you have to start all over. Now, I completed the challenge on this one by surviving for 1 hour, but it felt like a lot longer than that. I was actually shaking by the end of it, hissing a choice swear every time one of the monsters came too close for comfort. Now, once I completed the challenge for Dark Waters, the game showed a congratulatory message against a starry night background. Colorful, pixelated fireworks flashed and popped across the screen, and I sat there to admire them for a moment before I read the line of orange text at the bottom. Press start to receive your reward. I did so, but I wasn't prepared for what I saw. It was an image of me in my bedroom when I was younger, rendered in the best detail an SNES was capable of. My younger self sporting a goofy grin. Sitting on a tan-carpeted floor and back against a bed, holding a controller while sunlight bled around a shadow in the curtains. Judging by how young I looked in the picture, it was quite possible it was from one of the first times, if not the first time I'd ever actually played the game, and judging by the angle, it looked like the picture had been taken from the console itself. I'll admit, I jumped when I realized what I was looking at. Once I calmed down, I scooted over to my entertainment center and looked over the console. Then my eye was drawn to the strange glass bubble in the cartridge, and it all made sense. That was a camera. The manufacturer put it there, took a picture at some point when I was playing, and saved it and showed it to me when I earned the right to see. It made sense. If they could put a camera in a Game Boy cartridge, why not a Super Nintendo one? I laughed. It was a neat idea. Going back to where I'd been sitting, I took one last chance to marvel at a bit of technical wizardry, but when I did, that was the moment I decided I never wanted to do anything with the game again. Because you see, what I'd taken to be a shadow on one of the curtains wasn't really a shadow at all. It was the outline of a emaciated, skull-faced creature. Well, that, ladies and gentlemen, was quite the shit pasta. First of all, I do have to say the concept itself was interesting, but we have read stories like this before, where the game necessarily is not the focus, but rather a way to parallel the person's real-life story. And that can work. There are creepypastas that do that, and they do function well. But this was not one of them. It was a game that, as far as we know, never existed, and that is just convenient, isn't it? That's one of the tropes of a shitpost, is when they completely don't give any kind of a full-on explanation in the first act. We're not asking for the best of explanations, but just being told that it's not one of the best is a little bit, convenient for plot's sake, if you will, and not in a good way. The game itself bills itself as Action 52-ish, with a compilation of several games that apparently get progressively creepier as you go from game to game. And while, I guess it delivers some form of spooks, I guess you could say, it only really starts getting creepy about 2 to 3 games in there. And despite the pictures that you see, which, by the way, are really nice, mock-ups, big props to that, by the way, when a creepypasta does it. Unfortunately, it just did not work as effectively over here. They don't look all that creepy. They're really just standard games you'd see on the SNES platform. Or games that would, be that of what shovelware games would typically be on the system. Aside from that, the games didn't really deliver much that I was really hoping for in the terms of spookiness. Even the quote-unquote flagship scary game with the whole diving underwater wasn't actually that scary sounding, to be brutally honest. I mean, you just dive in the water, see a couple of sharks, and you have to quickly dodge out of it. I mean, it's more of a quick time simulator, I guess, if you will. Playing it for an hour, nothing really happens. Now you find out you have a picture of the game that, it actually takes of you, and you get to see it later. Of course, the game might have shown it to you if you played all the games in order like the player did now, but unfortunately the player did not do it, as a kid, so they got to see themselves from back in the past. And while that is a nice, novel touch, ultimately, it never billed itself off as creepy. The game had a proper technical reason for it, and there's no way you would ever see that being sent over the internet using the SNES. I mean, it just wouldn't be a thing. The deliberate way to make it creepy at the end with the whole silhouette in the... Fuck, I can't believe that was an actual thing. The whole silhouette of the skull face. It was pretty cringy. And ultimately, throughout as a whole, this creepypasta just didn't really deliver. In fact, there was a lot of things going against it, and henceforth it is a shitpasta. Now, shitpastas to me always have a redeeming side to them. There is genuine spookiness found here, but the thing is, it needs to be elevated. It needs to actually be worked upon. You need to make the game more of a focus. If you're gonna have the game take a picture of you, you gotta do something weird with it, man. You gotta take it to the next level. Even if you're on the verge of breaking the cringe wall, you still gotta take that chance. This as a whole is not creepy where it stands. It's just a collection of games, most of them crappy, arbitrary games. I mean, hell, one of them was what? Adventure Wars? SNES, pretty much? Overpowered on one side? It's weird, okay? It's interesting to see where this creepypasta could have gone when you actually start to think about it in your head. As a whole, right now, it doesn't work, and that's why it is a shitpasta. But if you rewrite how the game works, if you just make the game more of a focus, and you don't do that cringy skull face crap at the end, it could actually be pretty competent. But where it stands right now, it is a shitpasta. So let me know what you think about this shitpasta in the comments below. What would you change to actually make it better? And what would you rate it on a scale of shitpastaness? This is me, Mutahar, and if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. This has been another episode of Shitpastas, part of Haunted Gaming. This is me, Mutahar, and I am